You're watching once again a YouTube video presentation of the University of Wyoming Center on Aging. I'm Scott Veatch. I'm your host, and in this series we'll be discussing topics of interest for those who are caring for loved ones with dementia. We invite you to subscribe to the channel, and we hope that you'll hit that thumbs up like button. Both of those actions help our channel to grow and reach more people. And if you'll hit that notification bell, you'll be notified each time we upload a new video. Our guest today is Dr. Soo Borson. She is deputy editor of the Journal of American Geriatric Society. She is professor of clinical family medicine at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. She is professor emerita of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of Washington. She is co-lead for BOLD, Building Our Largest Dementia Infrastructure. It's a national center funded by the CDC, and her work focuses on strategies for improving dementia detection, care delivery, caregiver empowerment. And how she ever fits all of that on a business card, I have no idea, but we're certainly glad she's here. And Dr. Borson, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Scott, for having me, and call me Sue.
All right, will do. You and I actually met several months ago in May of 2022 at the Rocky Mountain Alzheimer's Summit in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I sat in on your presentation that day during that presentation. I kind of want to start there with some of the things that you covered. And one of the first things that I wrote down about your speech was that dementia needs a public health approach. What is a public health approach, and why is that needed in dementia?
That's a really good question, and I'll do my best to answer it. I'm learning too, by the way. So what is a public health approach? Well, a public health approach addresses a particular problem that has enormous significance in a population. And it's hard to think of something in the health sphere that has a bigger overall impact than dementia. Yeah, it's true that it's only a few million people who have dementia today in the United States. And yet, as we all know, the ripple effect of dementia on families and then on the wider society is very, very large. So it's a disease, it's a medical condition that has mainly social and behavioral manifestations, and therein lies its impact on this wider world. So a public health approach, first of all, seeks to increase awareness of a problem, to publicize the facts about the problem, to make that information widely available to anybody and everybody who can use information about it. So that's the beginning point. So then there's a messaging component. There's something that we're asking people to do with the knowledge that they gain. And that is to take action. That is to do something different from what they did before. And well, how would that apply in dementia? There are several ways. One way is with the person who's affected, that instead of keeping silent about it, they talk about it. They share their concerns with someone else. Eventually, we'd like them to share their concerns with a clinician who's in a position to hear the story and to help them understand what's going on. The second person we'd like to see do something different is family members. Again, instead of worrying about it and reacting to it, we ask family members to think about it, and then to bring it to the attention also of a clinician whenever possible, not to sit silently by. And then the third group who needs to do something different about it is doctors and people who function in the same role as doctors, such as nurse practitioners and physician assistants. So people who provide clinical care for individuals. They need to do something different too. They need to stop turning away. They need to look directly at the problem and open their ears and their eyes to hear the stories and the struggles of the people they're caring for. And I could, of course, go on forever talking about this. This is my life work and the thing I love to talk about. But each of these three kind of players, if you will, call it a triad, from the affected individual to their family members to the clinician, they need to form a tight and accountable unit in facing this condition together. And that is our major goal.
It sounds like then that always hasn't been the case, that those three groups may have trouble connecting. Is that the reason? Is that what's going on?
That's a part of what's going on. And certainly it's not a general rule, but it's too common, for example, that people avoid talking about it out of many emotional reactions. There's a lot of fear, as I know you know, attached to a diagnosis of dementia. And yet the truth is that dementia is a chronic condition and it can be managed. And people have a catastrophic image of what dementia is. And yes, there are catastrophes. There's no doubt about it. As there are with any serious chronic condition, there can be catastrophes, but life can be good. Life is not itself catastrophic in living with dementia. So all of this is designed to help people live better, find ways to live better. So what are some of the things that people avoid? Well, patients avoid it because they're afraid. And family members avoid it because they don't want to upset the person. And maybe they're afraid too. And doctors avoid it because they don't feel they have the expertise, they don't have the time, they don't know what to do. And so part of the message is that the best dementia care starts with a good relationship. And without a good relationship, there isn't much else that does much good. So that's what needs to be built, is the good relationship across all three of these partners in care, if you will.
You talked about early detection being key in this process. And yet, if there is denial, if they're on several parts, if there is hesitation to go see a clinician, I would think that early detection could be really tough. How do you know when to go?
Well, Scott, this is why we have a center dedicated to early detection, is
right.
to try to crack that nut. So we know that on average, when somebody does end up getting a diagnosis, and by the way, I think you're probably quite aware that only about half of people with dementia have a diagnosis. You know, of those who can be diagnosed, only about half have been diagnosed. And those who are diagnosed tend to be on the more severe end of the spectrum. There are many exceptions to that. I mean, this isn't a universal, but it's on average, dementia is diagnosed at about moderate stage disease or worse. After it's been there for several years, it's already had significant effects on a family, on a person of family, and on their full networks of those who care about them, you know, social and occupational networks. The impact has already been deeply felt. And so if what we want to do is mitigate some of the negative impacts, early detection is a key to that. How? Well, as you know, we don't have a magic bullet for Alzheimer's or any other dementia. We can't reverse the course. People do hope for this, and there's much work around this. And yes, we do have new drugs coming online that might make a difference, but we don't know how much of a difference they're going to make. So for at least the rest of my active life, we're going to be dealing with how to make life better. And how do we do that? We get everybody involved in making life better is the way we do it. We activate patients and families and clinicians together to embark on a journey of providing the best possible care we can.
I think back to when my wife was diagnosed, and she was in her early 50s at the time, and the neurologist was very reluctant to place such a severe permanent diagnosis on someone who was so relatively young. Is that common?
That's very common. And it's what's also common is that the problems in individuals who are experiencing early onset, young onset disease, you know, before they enter the usual age of risk, like your wife, it's usually diagnosed as something else, like depression.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, that's a very common pattern. And sometimes it's because the individual is in fact depressed as well, but it's usually not an either or. But the reluctance is partly out of ignorance, not realizing that dementia actually is not a respecter of age. It gets increasingly exponentially more common as people get older and older, especially the Alzheimer type and microvascular dementias. But my youngest patient was 28 years old when I first met her, and she had already had 3 illegitimate children and did not know who the fathers were. And she had Alzheimer's disease, and I didn't want to believe it either. But that's what she had. So it's some of it is simply not knowing that right. This could come on at much younger ages than anyone thinks. And of course, the course can be a lot longer when, as it was with your wife. You know, she lived a long time with her dementia. Yes. Yeah, because physically, she was fairly healthy. She didn't have the common chronic other diseases that older adults are liable to have. So her body could withstand the failure of her brain for a much longer period than the typical older adult who develops Alzheimer's.
We can't really, well, let me ask it this way. Can we label that as a deficiency in the medical community? Is it just where we are along the Alzheimer's timeline as far as early diagnosis is concerned? What would you say?
Well, so a couple of things that I would say is that in your wife's case, we didn't have biomarkers then. Correct. When she was diagnosed. And so for young onset patients like your wife would be someone now who would always be referred to a specialist. And so part of the issue is, well, which specialist? Not all neurologists, for example, are specialists in dementia. They, as a group, neurologists may not have more knowledge than primary care docs do. But dementia specialists do have that knowledge, and they may be neurologists, specially trained. They may be geriatric psychiatrists like me, specially trained. They may be geriatricians, older adult specialists who are interested and get special additional training. And some of them are primary care docs, general practitioners, family doctors, and internists who have an interest and educate themselves. They seek out the training that will help them make these diagnoses. But we do have now biomarkers that are both based on imaging of the brain, and now newly coming online, a range of blood tests that will ultimately be very helpful in making these diagnoses. That work is progressing quite quickly and will be of great value, but not for everybody, because not everybody is going to need that very advanced kind of diagnostic assessment. It has special utility in certain subgroups. Yeah.
What you spoke of earlier is so familiar to me, because from the time that I first took her to our family doctor until there was a diagnosis was about a year, because they tried every single test to eliminate everything from sleep deficiency to a B12 deficiency to, as you mentioned, clinical depression. She had sleep studies and blood work and MRI and CAT scans and stress tests and everything that they, put her through. And it was just, okay, we've eliminated this and this and this and this and this. And finally, they ended up with that diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's. I guess that was common 15 years ago. Is it less common today, or is it still the same thing?
No, it's less common today. I think part of our message has been received to a large extent, which is that a diagnosis of dementia and what type of dementia it is does not require ruling out every conceivable cause. We can make a positive diagnosis. So when I started in this field a long time ago, it was a diagnosis of exclusion. You do everything, as your wife had done, and when nothing turns up, it must be Alzheimer's. Well, now we can make a positive diagnosis of Alzheimer's in with much less confusion and uncertainty.
And I think too, as I think back to where I began the journey as a caregiver, I would have loved to have had information like this available back in 2007.
Yeah.
There just simply wasn't anything. I was pretty much on my own.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. That was a whole different era. We're in a new world now. And I know many of the people who watch your channel must be thinking the same thing that you are, that if I'd only known, or if it were only different. I do want to mention something else about that. And it's that I've heard so many stories that are really painful to hear from family members, caregivers, who just didn't know what it was they were seeing. Who they were noticing a change. They didn't know how to describe it, what words to put to it, how to think about it. Maybe it was their fault. Maybe he's having an affair. Maybe, who knows what's going on, but something is off. And it can take years for families to come to see, oh, now I see it's all coming together, and now I see a pattern here. And one of the missions of our work has to be to shorten that time between the first observation that something is off and getting to a diagnosis. You know, there's a very poignant story told to me by a wife about how much she and her husband fought during the years before she recognized that he had brain failure. That's what was happening. He was a very, very brilliant man and was able to continue to do a lot of things that were very much like himself. And yet he'd have these aberrant events. He would do things that made no sense, that he never would have done before. And she didn't know how to understand it. And they would get into arguments and struggles and fights about his behavior that was quite hurtful to their bond as a very happily married couple. And she regrets now that she didn't have and couldn't have had the information that she needed because it wasn't out there at the time.
You mentioned regrets, and I think those are all too common. You also mentioned the new world, and I want to talk about that, and I want to do that in part 2. So we're going to invite you to be back with us in 2 weeks when the next episode airs. Our guest again will be Dr. Soo Borson, the deputy editor of the Journal of American Geriatric Society, professor of clinical family medicine at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine, professor emerita of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of Washington, and co-lead of BOLD, Building Our Largest Dementia Infrastructure, National Center funded by the CDC. We are going to do that, and we'll come back with you next time on part 2.
See you then, Scott, and thank you very much for having me.
You've been watching once again a YouTube video presentation of the University of Wyoming Center on Aging. We invite you to subscribe to our channel. We hope that you'll hit that thumbs up like button. Those actions will help our channel to grow and reach more people. And if you'll tap that notification bell, you'll be notified automatically each time we upload a new video. I'm Scott Veatch. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you again next time.